Some betrayals don't just cut deep. They carve you into someone unrecognizable. I walked into that boardroom years ago, thinking I was part of something greater, only to be told, without hesitation, that I was replaceable, disposable, a placeholder in a game I didn't even know I was playing. They laughed when I stumbled. They whispered when I failed. And when they finally pushed me out, they expected me to vanish quietly. But pain is a strange thing. It either breaks you or builds you into something stronger than they ever imagined. Now, standing in the heart of the city I've rebuilt, I don't see their faces in the crowd anymore. I see my own reflection in every tower of glass and steel. They called me temporary. I became permanent. My name's Isabella Grant, and I'm 36, living in the pulse of Atlanta, Georgia, where ambition is the city's second language. From the balcony of our 22nd floor condo, I can see the skyline glow like a promise I've been chasing my whole life. The place isn't technically ours. It belongs to Grant and Foster Developments, the billion-dollar construction empire my father-in-law built from scratch. My husband, Nathan, and I live here as part of the executive perks package. On paper, we're both high-ranking players in the company. In reality, that's only true for one of us. I didn't grow up imagining I'd be part of a corporate dynasty. My mother raised me in a cramped Savannah apartment, holding down 2 jobs, receptionist by day, diner waitress by night. She'd stumble home smelling of coffee and exhaustion, yet still managed to ask about my day. From her, I learned resilience, the art of making decisions quickly, and the danger of depending on anyone else to fight your battles. That mindset carried me through college and into a banking career, where I discovered I had a knack for understanding money's hidden language. Numbers never lied to me. If you knew how to read them, they told you everything. Where risk hid, where opportunity waited. When I met Nathan, I thought I might finally take a softer road. He had this easy smile, a way of making any room feel warmer. But he was also born into a world where challenges were optional. Private schools, summer homes, family trust funds. Nathan had never been forced to wrestle with uncertainty. His father, Richard Grant, built Grant and Foster into a southern construction powerhouse, swallowing competitors and reshaping skylines. Everyone assumed Nathan would inherit the throne. But Nathan didn't have the hunger for it. One evening, not long after our wedding, Nathan turned to me on the couch and said it plainly. "Izzy, I'll never be the kind of CEO Dad is. I'd rather let someone else steer and just play my part." His words landed heavy, but I didn't argue. I knew I was wired differently. I lived for decisive moments, for finding solutions in the middle of chaos. My mother used to joke I was born with a calculator in one hand and a game plan in the other. After the wedding, I resigned from the bank, ready to focus on our marriage, maybe start a family. But Richard had other plans. He invited me to his office, a space lined with blueprints and plaques from decades of projects. "Isabella," he said, leaning forward with a kind of sharpness that made even seasoned executives sweat. "This company needs people who think like you. Numbers, strategy, grit, you've got it. I want you on the team." I hesitated. The quiet life I'd pictured flashed in my mind. But there was something in his tone, a challenge. And I've never been able to walk away from one. I agreed. That choice changed everything. At first, I was just another mid-level employee, learning how to read construction schedules, negotiate with suppliers, and keep projects on track. But Richard watched me closely. Within months, he started pulling me into board meetings. The first time I walked into that walnut-paneled conference room, I could feel the skepticism radiating off the long-time board members. To them, I was the boss's daughter-in-law, a possible distraction at best. I didn't let it rattle me. In banking, I'd learned to dissect budgets and spot inefficiencies most people overlooked. So I spoke up, suggesting ways to cut material costs without sacrificing quality, flagging risks others ignored. Slowly, their polite nods turned into genuine interest. By the end of that first year, they were asking for my opinion before signing off on major contracts. Nathan, meanwhile, was little more than a ghost. He'd show up late to meetings, if at all, and disappear before lunch. He'd say they were too technical, or that I handled them better anyway. His last name gave him a seat at the table, but he never truly occupied it. One night, I came home from a marathon negotiation session, running on caffeine and adrenaline, only to find Nathan sprawled on the couch, controller in hand, battling digital zombies. "You skipped today's acquisition meeting," I said, setting down my bag. You were supposed to help present the numbers. He didn't even look away from the screen. You've got it covered, Izzy. They listen to you more than me. Something in me shifted that night. I started to see the space between us widening. His indifference wasn't just toward the company. It was toward everything that required commitment. So I threw myself deeper into work, determined to earn my place not as Richard Grant's daughter-in-law, but as someone essential to the machine. Richard became my mentor. He taught me to read people the way I read spreadsheets, to know when to push an agenda and when to bide my time. I thrived on the challenge. With every successful project, my confidence grew. By the time Richard retired, I was steering multi-million-dollar deals and carrying the weight of decisions that affected thousands of employees. The board leaned on me heavily. Our profits climbed, our reputation expanded, and I felt the satisfaction of building something real. My mother's voice was always in the back of my mind. If you want something to stand, build it with your own hands. Nathan, on the other hand, drifted further. He'd wander into the office late, charm the receptionists, and then vanish for personal errands that I eventually stopped asking about. Conversations at home dwindled to surface-level pleasantries. Groceries, weather, who was picking up dry cleaning. It was as if we were co-tenants instead of partners. Then came the unexpected storm. My older cousin, Sienna, breezed into Atlanta after her third divorce, all perfume and expensive heels. She'd grown up with me in Savannah before moving to Miami to chase wealthier horizons. Her charm was sharp, her ambition sharper. The first time she met Nathan at a family barbecue, she laughed too easily at his jokes, leaning in just a little too close. I noticed but brushed it off. I was buried in work, finalizing a bid for a massive downtown project. A few weeks later, Nathan came home with a strange tension in his posture. "Izzy, we need to talk," he said. His voice uncharacteristically serious. I set down my laptop, already uneasy. "Sienna's pregnant," he said, staring at the floor. "It's mine. I want a divorce." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. Pregnant, divorce. The words didn't make sense strung together like that. My own cousin. My husband. The betrayal was so absurd it felt almost theatrical. But as the shock settled into my bones, something else sparked. A cold, calculating clarity. This wasn't just about marriage. It was about my position in the company. About the empire I'd helped strengthen. If I handled this wrong, I could lose both. And losing was not in my nature. The hours after Nathan's confession passed in a blur, but not because I broke down. I didn't cry, didn't yell. I couldn't afford the luxury. I was already thinking like the strategist Richard trained me to be. I needed to control the narrative in the boardroom, in the company, and in my personal life. The next morning, I drove out to the Grant estate. It's the kind of place that makes you feel small. Manicured lawns, a fountain bigger than my old apartment building, and a circular driveway lined with expensive cars Nathan couldn't even name. Richard was in his study, flipping through old project binders like they were family photo albums. His wife, Margaret, hovered nearby with her ever-present cup of tea. I didn't waste time. "Nathan's been having an affair," I said. "With my cousin Sienna. She's pregnant. He wants a divorce." Margaret gasped, hand flying to her pearls, but Richard's gaze didn't flinch. He just closed the binder, leaned back, and studied me for a moment. Then he spoke, voice low but firm. "You are the backbone of this company. You've earned your place. I don't care what Nathan does, you stay. I'll deal with him." Relief wasn't the right word for what I felt. It was more like confirmation. Richard had always valued results over bloodline sentimentality. Nathan was his son, but I was the one delivering growth. That meant my position was safe, for now. When my day off rolled around, Sienna showed up at the condo like she owned the place. Her hair was perfect, her heels sharp enough to cut glass. She gave me a pitying smile. "Izzy, I'm sorry you couldn't have kids. But don't worry. Once I move in, I'll make sure you get enough to start over somewhere nice." Behind her, Nathan sat on the sofa, avoiding my eyes. I didn't rise to the bait. "The divorce is fine," I said evenly. "We'll have lawyers sort alimony and property." Then I let my gaze slide to her. "But Sienna, do you really think Nathan is the prize you're after?" Her smirk deepened. "He's the heir to this empire. Of course he is." If only she knew. The next morning, we met in a sleek glass-walled conference room at Grant & Foster's headquarters. My attorney, Danielle Hart, sat beside me, sharp, composed, and lethal in negotiations. Nathan and Sienna sat across the table, looking like they'd walked in from a lifestyle magazine spread. Sienna started strong. Name your alimony figure, Izzy. We'll make sure you're comfortable. Danielle didn't even blink. She slid a folder across the table. Actually, since you're now cohabitating with Nathan, we'll be claiming alimony from both of you. Sienna's confident posture faltered. From me. I already pay my ex. Danielle's smile didn't reach her eyes. And now you'll be paying more. The property discussion hit next. Sienna waved a manicured hand. The condo is Nathan's family property. It's not part of the split. Danielle didn't miss a beat. Incorrect. The condo is owned by Grant and Foster Developments. It's leased to employees at market rate. The company decides who lives there. Nathan blinked. Wait. It's not Dad's personally. Sienna's head whipped toward him. So, we can't stay here for free. Danielle slid over the lease agreement. The rent figure made Nathan's jaw tighten. Atlanta luxury isn't forgiving. Not even for the founder's son. My salary can't cover that, he muttered. I stayed silent, watching the realization hit Sienna. She hadn't landed a CEO. She'd landed a man with a middling executive salary, one padded entirely by perks she couldn't access. When it came time to finalize, the split was quick and clean. No savings to divide. No sprawling estate to fight over. Sienna's dreams of lavish living evaporated before my eyes. Nathan's easy life shrank to the size of his paycheck. I walked out of that conference room lighter than I had in years. But I wasn't naive. People like Sienna don't fold quietly. And I was right. 3 weeks later, word spread through the company grapevine that Sienna's pregnancy claim was a fabrication. She'd lied to corner Nathan, banking on the assumption that Richard would bankroll her. When the truth reached the estate, Margaret was devastated. Richard was furious. She's no daughter-in-law of mine, he told me over coffee at his kitchen table. And Nathan, well, he's about to learn what it means to earn his place here. From then on, Sienna wasn't welcome at family gatherings. Richard cut Nathan from any meaningful company responsibilities, leaving him to handle paperwork and minor errands. The humiliation was almost visible on Nathan's face whenever we crossed paths in the office. It didn't take long for Sienna to bolt. One morning she packed her designer bags, muttered something about needing more excitement, and disappeared. Nathan was left standing in the ruins of his own decisions. A month later, he turned up at my new midtown apartment. The place was smaller than the condo but mine. Every square foot paid for with my own work. Izzy, maybe we could try again, he said, his voice carrying that old softness. I laughed, not cruelly, just tired. Nathan, you left the marriage long before Sienna. I'm not interested in going backwards. Richard kept his word. He not only let me stay at Grant and Foster. He elevated me. You're doing what I always wanted Nathan to do, he told me once, pride softening his usually hard features. I threw myself into work even more. Every project I signed, every crew I hired, felt like a promise to the thousands of employees depending on me. Profits climbed. Our reputation strengthened. And for the first time in years, my life was entirely mine. Nathan faded into the background. Sienna became nothing more than a cautionary tale told in hushed tones among certain circles. And me. I learned that the most dangerous thing you can do to someone who underestimates you is let them. Because while they're busy misjudging your worth, you're building something they'll never touch. 6 months after the divorce, Grant and Foster was riding a high. We just closed a deal for a mixed-use development downtown, one of the largest in Atlanta's history, and my name was on every signature page. The board credited me for the win, and Richard made sure the media knew it too. My face was in the Atlanta Business Chronicle, smiling in a hard hat beside city officials. That was my public victory. Privately, I was setting the stage for something else entirely. Nathan had been demoted to Special Projects Coordinator, which in reality meant babysitting small renovations no one else wanted. His office was no longer on the executive floor. He didn't have an assistant. He didn't even have a view. It was corporate exile without the satisfaction of a clean firing. I could have left it at that, but I'd learned something from my years in both banking and construction. Leaving loose ends invites trouble. And Nathan was a loose end I wasn't willing to leave. The opportunity came during a quarterly board meeting. We'd been reviewing departmental reports when I casually mentioned a compliance gap in special projects. The room quieted. Compliance was one of those words that could make any seasoned executive shift in their seat. I'm concerned about accountability in smaller divisions, I said, sliding a file toward the CFO. Especially when budgets are less than transparent. Richard glanced at me, understanding instantly. Run an internal audit, he told the CFO. Full scope. 2 weeks later, the report landed on Richard's desk and mine. Nathan's department was a mess. Over budget on 3 projects, delayed timelines, supplier invoices with suspicious markups. Nothing that screamed criminal, but enough to raise eyebrows about competence. Richard called me into his office. "Do we fire him?" he asked, voice flat. I shook my head. "No, that would make it look personal. We reassign him. Somewhere public. Somewhere where failure is visible." Which is how Nathan found himself promoted to lead the community outreach wing, a department that required weekly press briefings, donor events, and constant scrutiny. For a man who hated pressure, it was a perfect slow burn. Sienna, meanwhile, had resurfaced in Buckhead, latching onto a local real estate agent with more ambition than income. Word was she was trying to start a luxury staging business. I didn't have to interfere. Her reputation did the work for me. Atlanta's upper circles are polite, but they don't forget. Her invitations dried up, her partnerships fell through. Every time her name appeared in a gossip column, it was next to a word like controversy or scandal. Still, I wasn't done. I'd been quietly cultivating relationships with members of the board, the kind Nathan had coasted on for years. Over dinners, charity galas, and late-night strategy calls, I became not just their acting CEO, but their confidant. When Richard announced he was formally stepping down and the position of president was to be voted on, the outcome was already decided. The morning of the vote, Nathan cornered me in the hallway. "You know Dad's not going to give that title to you," he said, smirking. "You're temporary. Always have been." I just smiled. "We'll see." When the votes were tallied, I wasn't just named president. I won unanimously. Even Richard's old-school allies, the ones who'd once doubted me, had cast their ballots in my favor. Nathan sat in the back of the room, jaw tight, watching me take the seat he'd been told since childhood would be his. That should have been the end. But life, I've learned, has a way of circling back to test your resolve. 3 months into my presidency, a proposal crossed my desk from the community outreach department, Nathan's department. It was a high-profile charity built in partnership with a national housing nonprofit. The budget was inflated, the schedule unrealistic, the risk astronomical. Approving it would be corporate suicide. I called him into my office. "Did you read this proposal before signing it?" "Yes." He shrugged, that same infuriating shrug I'd seen 100 times in our marriage. "It's good PR. Details don't matter." I leaned forward. "In this company, details are everything. We don't burn money to look good." He muttered something under his breath about me being cold. I didn't respond. Instead, I rejected the proposal and reassigned the project to someone else. Nathan was sidelined again, this time publicly. The message was clear. This was my company now. Sienna tried one last time to needle her way back into relevance. She showed up at a charity gala I was hosting, draped in sequins and false confidence. When I greeted her, she smiled sweetly and whispered, "Careful, Izzy. You're only as powerful as the people around you let you be." I met her gaze without blinking. "And you're only as relevant as the mistakes people are willing to forget." She didn't stay long after that. The years that followed were good ones for Grant and Foster. We expanded into 3 new states, launched sustainable building initiatives, and became a fixture in national construction rankings. I built a leadership team that was loyal because they respected me, not because of a shared last name. Nathan eventually left the company altogether. He took a mid-level job at a competitor's firm in Charlotte, where no one cared about his family name. Sienna vanished from Atlanta's social circuit entirely, replaced by the next wave of scandal chasers. Sometimes I wonder if they ever talk about me, if they tell themselves a version of the story where they were the victims and I was the villain. It doesn't matter. I know the truth. Richard knows the truth. The board knows the truth. And so do the thousands of people whose livelihoods I protect every day. Because in the end, revenge wasn't about ruining them. It was about proving, to them, to myself, to anyone watching, that I was never temporary. I was permanent. 5 years passed. 5 years of building, winning, and carving my name into the skyline of Atlanta. Not in marble, but in steel and glass. Grant and Foster had grown beyond anyone's projections. Our projects dotted the city like exclamation points, each one a declaration. I am here. I'm staying. Richard had fully retired to his lake house, content to watch from afar. He'd call sometimes, checking in not as a mentor, but as a proud co-conspirator. You've taken this company further than I ever did, he said once. I could hear the smile in his voice. I didn't think you had that kind of fire when I first met you. I smiled back into the phone. Neither did Nathan. The truth was, I hadn't thought much about Nathan or Sienna in years. Their absence was like removing a thorn. The wound healed and the memory dulled. Until one Thursday morning in early spring, when an email hit my private inbox. It was from a law firm in Charlotte. The subject line read, Urgent, request for assistance, Nathan Foster. For a moment I considered deleting it without reading, but curiosity, that dangerous spark, won. Opened it. The message was short. Nathan had been accused of embezzlement at his new firm. The partners wanted a reference, someone to speak to his character during the preliminary investigation. I laughed aloud. There was a time when I would have savored this, crafted a poetic, cutting response designed to destroy him. But as I stared at the blinking cursor, I realized I didn't care enough to write more than one line. I typed, I cannot recommend him for any position of responsibility, and hit send. That was it. No grand speech. No final duel. Just a quiet closing of a door that had been ajar for too long. That night, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse, looking out over the city. The Grant and Foster Tower. My tower gleamed in the distance, its top floors still lit from the late-night teams working inside. I sipped my wine and thought about how far I'd come. The world hadn't just underestimated me. It had misread me entirely. And then came the call. Isabella. The voice on the other end was shaky. Took me a moment to place it. Jenna. I need your help, she said, words tumbling. It's bad. I made some investments, they went wrong, and now. No, I said, cutting her off. You don't get to call me when you're sinking. You had your chance. Her breath hitched. Please. We're still family. I let the silence stretch until it was sharp. No, Sienna. We're history. And I hung up. It wasn't anger I felt afterward. It was clarity. The people who tried to break me were now broken. Not because I'd spent years plotting their downfall, but because they'd built their lives on quicksand. My success was never about pulling them under. It was about standing on solid ground myself. That summer, we broke ground on a project I'd been dreaming about for years. The Foster Center for Architecture and Urban Innovation. The irony of the name wasn't lost on me. I funded it personally, bypassing any need for board approval. It would be a hub for young architects, engineers, and urban planners. A place to create the kind of city I wished had existed when I was starting out. At the opening ceremony, I gave a short speech. I talked about resilience, vision, and the importance of building things meant to last. I didn't mention Nathan or Sienna. I didn't need to. Afterward, as I walked through the glass atrium, sunlight spilling over the polished floors, I caught my reflection. For a moment, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Confident, composed, untouchable. And I thought of that first day in the boardroom, when they'd looked at me and seen someone temporary. Temporary had become permanent. Years from now, people will forget the small scandals. They'll forget who married whom, who lost what title, who whispered what behind closed doors. But they'll see the buildings. They'll see the skyline. They'll see the Foster Center. And maybe, just maybe, they'll wonder about the woman who built it all. I don't need them to know my whole story, just that I was here, and that I never left.